Iran has been expelled from Syria, but retains an essential influence there. There is not domestic tranquility in Syria. There are more and more accounts of massacres of Alawites and others who do not agree with the Salafi Sunni group that is now in power. There are Uyghurs who boast of their desire to return to China and commit acts of terror, who have been incorporated into the new Syrian armed forces. This is a mess. Nobody knows where it's going. I don't think the Trump administration has a coherent policy on this. Probably it is taking direction from the Israelis, because that has been the pattern in the past. So I don't know what's going on between us and Mr. al-Shara, because in part we are divided. On the one hand, we had the State Department putting a $10 million bounty on his head while he was being aided and trained by the CIA. So the left hand and the right hand did not apparently coordinate. We worked with the Turks, we worked with the Israelis, we worked with the British, we worked with the French to produce an effective Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, which was able to penetrate the hollowed out army of Bashar al-Assad and overthrow him. But the Turks have their own objectives. They may or may not coincide with Mr. al-Shara's. The Israelis are seizing Syrian territory after having destroyed Syria's ability to defend itself in order to facilitate a possible attack on Iran. Inside Syria, it is not at all clear that the Kurds are willing to come under the umbrella of Mr. al-Shara. I'm not quite sure what they think they're doing in Syria. I think there is no strategy. As we've discussed before, there are multiple actors in Syria. Of course, al-Shara has now formally disbanded the various groups in the coalition of jihadis that he headed. He wears an Armani suit. He's very handsome. He's pitching himself to the West as an idealistic democratic person. He says there will be elections in about 4 years. He says there will be a constitution worked out. He looks very much, however, like a strongman, a traditional Arab dictator or a thug in power, a clever one, if you will, in the case of Israel and its genocide. It is also historically very anti-Iranian. There seems to be some kind of behind-the-scenes back-channel communication going on with Iran, but Mr. Trump seems to want to have a deal with Iran. I don't know how far that will go, but anyway, perhaps he's not quite as belligerent toward Iran as he showed in his first term. But he is not belligerent on Ukraine. He wants the war to end. I think that's sincere. That would be to the advantage of Europe and the United States. And it would enable an attempt to build a new and more constructive relationship with Russia. It might involve China in a peacemaking role alongside the United States, which Mr. Trump seems to want to see happen. So that's a bright spot. And the Israelis want to fragment Syria. They want to break it up into small statelets, which would facilitate divide and rule and enable them to dominate Syria without facing a threat from a unified Syria. But Syria, in many ways, is the traditional heart of the Arab world. Even though they are Muta-Arab, they're not originally Arab. They were converted to become Arabs. They were assimilated. Their genetic background is not Arab, but they have emerged. Syria has emerged. It was always a center of the Mashriq, the eastern part of the Arab world. There were three traditional centers of authority, one of which was Damascus, the other was Baghdad and Cairo. Baghdad has obviously lost that role, so has Cairo. Damascus is potentially a leader in the Arab world, which is one reason that Saudis and others are very concerned about its evolution. Will it become a haven for extremism? This is something of great concern to the Gulf Arabs, and it's also of great concern to the Russians, who are still bargaining with the new regime in Damascus over their role in Syria. But they do not want Syria to become an exporter of Islamist terrorism. So there are many, many forces at play. And this is too early to say much of anything. I don't think the Trump administration knows what it's doing, and I think it will take it a while to figure that out. The Palestinians have shown that they will suffer enormous indignities and huge numbers of deaths and wounds in order to stay in their own land. I don't think the Egyptians or Jordanians or the Indonesians are going to cave. What Mr. Trump is forecasting is a rupture in U.S. relations with Jordan and Egypt, not their acquiescence in his scheme. I don't think Jordan could survive the resettlement of more Palestinians. That would result in the transformation of Jordan into something quite different from what it has been. Egypt, of course, is dependent on the United States, which has exempted it from the cutoff in foreign aid, because that is essentially a bribe to keep Egypt in the Camp David framework, normal relations with Israel. Egyptians are flexible. Some in the Arab world consider them to be spineless, too flexible, too adaptable. But even Egyptians have national pride and honor, and I don't believe Mr. Trump can bully them into taking the Palestinians. His envoy, Mr. Witkoff, has also suggested they be moved to Indonesia. I don't think he talked to the Indonesians about that. This invited a counter proposal from Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, that perhaps the Israelis should be moved to Greenland, which is nothing if not imaginative. I think all this is nonsense. Qatar, the Qatari emir, just visited Damascus and made a declaration calling on the Israelis to withdraw from the buffer zone between Syria and Israel, which the Israelis have occupied. He, in other words, endorsed the UN position on this. Qatar very clearly has had a role with the Turks in the creation and training of Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham. It is a champion of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is anathema to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, and others, because it is a democratic Islamist movement. So Qatar's perspective is a little different from the Saudis. But the Saudis worry about Syria for two reasons. One, of course, they realize that only a unified Syria can be a bulwark against Israel. They have their problems with the Turks, in part because of Turkey's support for the Muslim Brotherhood and for Islamist democracy. But they are trying very hard to rebuild influence in Syria. So I think the Qataris and the Saudis, the Emiratis, are all on the same wavelength in terms of trying to help Syria get on its feet and hopefully not turn against them and hopefully revive itself as the center of influence that it traditionally has been. The United States, if it pursues this course, will do the following. First, by raising tariffs, it will create inflation. So instead of lowering prices, as Mr. Trump promised he would in the campaign, it will raise prices for consumers. And second, much of American industry depends on inputs, that is, parts that are imported from various places, including especially Canada and Mexico. This will deindustrialize the United States. It will cause a breakdown in the production process, and industrial jobs, instead of increasing, will be lost. Third, because inflation is going up, employment is down, we're going to have higher interest rates. Government borrowing will become more expensive. The ability to pile debt on debt will become less as interest rates rise. The dollar will go up, which will make U.S. exports less competitive and cut them back, even as imports to the United States become more expensive and cause inflation. And I think, in a sense, the administration is off to such a bad start. It is offending so many constituencies and destroying the services on which they depend. There will be a large exodus of experts from the federal government, and it will be greatly weakened. It will not make America great again. It will make America weak. The U.S. government at the moment is having convulsions. It is not effective. It is confused. Nobody knows what is happening. And we get examples like the fatal crash at Reagan National Airport the other night when a military helicopter, a Black Hawk with 3 people aboard, crashed into or was struck by an American Airlines, not a Brazilian aircraft, by the way, a Canadian one, with 64 people aboard. Everybody died. Mr. Trump's immediate reaction, instead of saying, gee, my heart is with the people who lost their lives and their relatives and so forth, said, well, this is the product of DEI, meaning an effort to create diversity in our workforce. As it happens, that's total nonsense. It turns out that the air traffic controllers at National Airport, there should be 30 of them, there are 19 at the present time. The air traffic control tower was understaffed with one person trying to handle helicopters, which are on one frequency, and at the same time handle aircraft, which are on a different frequency. And he was overworked. He or she was overworked. We don't know who this was. I hope we never find out, because I think it would be highly unfair to whoever that was. So we get jumping to conclusions which are consistent with his ideology. This morning, I just finished this, I had a visit from a young lady who was employed by a local university here in Rhode Island, and she talked about the executive order that has suspended support for diversity in the schools. And apparently the schools have been told that they are to engage in patriotic indoctrination of kids from kindergarten through the 12th grade. And this means they cannot recognize anything but 2 genders. They cannot say anything that is critical of the United States or that deals with the history of minorities in the United States. This sounds very totalitarian to me. I hope it is not true. Essentially, the Iron Dome, by the way, I used to authorize the subsidies to Israel to develop that when I was Assistant Secretary of Defense. It was very experimental. I was never sure it was going to work. I don't think it does work very well, except it is a psychological defense against the terror that arises from missile attack, or rocket attack, I should say, because it is basically aimed at rockets, unguided rockets, rather than missiles. This is Al-Qassam missiles, which are just basically a rocket with no guidance. And how well it works is a matter of some controversy. What Mr. Trump envisages would be lovely, of course. It would cost trillions of dollars. It would be a very long-term project. Its feasibility is not certain. What is certain is that if the United States embarks on such a program, the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, and others will do the same. In the end, you will have spent a huge amount of money. You will have destabilized the nuclear balance because, of course, the fear on the part of the Russians, Chinese, and others would be that you are acquiring an invulnerability against counterattack that would enable you to do a first strike on them and decapitate their leadership in Moscow or Beijing. To bring China in was very difficult previously because the Chinese had an absolutely deterrent, just enough to constitute what the French call a force de frappe, a counterstrike force, which would take a bite out of someone who attacked them, but not obliterate them. Now they seem to have gone for mutually assured destruction as a doctrine. The expectation is they will have some 1,500 warheads on missiles within a few years. And so they're building up. This makes it possible for the US and the Russians to build down. And we might be able to come to a three-party agreement in which everybody had a cap. And much of the arsenals that were created in the United States and the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation would be reduced. China would be left with a higher level of nuclear weaponization, and we would all agree not to exceed the caps. That is conceivable. Does Mr. Trump have the diplomatic staff and talent to do that? We will see. And I don't think in the case of China that he's irrevocably committed to the kind of belligerent position that the Biden administration took, even though, and this is an important caveat, he is surrounded by hardline China opponents, hawks. His cabinet is full of people who don't appear to agree with him on many basic issues, but are nonetheless coming into office. To go back to Tulsi Gabbard, she clearly agrees with him on some issues. She is a strong, I'm sorry to say, a strong supporter of the genocide and very anti-Muslim. And so but she is not. She does agree with Mr. Trump on Ukraine. I don't know what her view is on Iran, but she does seem to have an independent mind and the ability to reason rather than to be the prisoner of the narrative. So she is the exception. If we look around, we see the new defense secretary removing the portrait of General Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We see him stripping Mr. Milley, General Milley, of his security clearance and his security protection. This has been done to other people, the former director of the CIA and so on. There's a great deal of vindictiveness in evidence, petty moves by people around Trump on Trump's orders. Mr. Trump's Stargate initiative, $500 billion supposedly, was supposed to produce. That's not viable anymore. So that is a fundamental change. And it illustrates, finally, a key point, and that is science, technology, whether it's engineering technology or other forms of technology, science develops through a collaborative process. This means that it is to your advantage to have the widest possible network collaborating in a dialogue about science, about technology. You cannot afford, the United States or Brazil or no one else can afford to write off China as a source of engineering and scientific talent. It has over 1/4 of the world's scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians. And we've just seen, in the case of DeepSeek, that they are capable of remarkable feats of innovation. The answer to our prosperity is not to isolate ourselves from them, which is what we have been doing, but to re-engage. And we'll see whether Mr. Trump is able to conceive of that. In the case of China, after promising a 60% tariff, Mr. Trump has led off with a proposed 10% tariff. This suggests that he wants to strike a grand bargain of some sort with China, and the 10% tariff is an opening point of pressure on leverage on the Chinese, and which he hopes to build. But I don't think China's in any mood to acquiesce in the sort of thing that happened last time. The Chinese don't want a trade war with the United States, but they can survive one if it comes. And the same is true of the technology war, where we've just had a dramatic development in the creation of DeepSeek by a small private company in China, not connected to the Chinese government, not in receipt of any subsidies from the Chinese government, entirely self-financed. And that DeepSeek program is a death blow to some of the major American tech companies, which had hoped to sell AI services like a commodity. But DeepSeek is open source. Anybody, you can download it on your laptop or desktop and start building your own AI on that basis. This just knocks the whole idea of pay for service out of the box. Second, the cost of it was about 3% of what ChatGPT and others have incurred, $5.5 million. Very little money indeed. This was the creation of a small group of young Chinese PhDs in computer programming and engineering, and they did it without reference to what was going on abroad. They are accused of having replicated some of ChatGPT's learning process. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Doesn't matter. What they've come up with is a completely different, formidable, but we do not have in the United States either the workforce or the work ethic to rival Taiwan or the China mainland, which is catching up fairly rapidly. So I think the idea that you turn on Taiwan with tariffs and so on when you're trying to compete with China is madness. And it's very perplexing to people in Taiwan. Is Mr. Trump pro-Taiwan or not? It doesn't appear that he is. And in fact, a lot of people in Taiwan are quite concerned that he might do a deal with Beijing to the disadvantage of Taiwan. That's not impossible. But the other part of his statement that is nonsense is that people are going to rush to build fabs in the United States. TSMC is already doing that. Federal subsidies are necessary for that to be built in Arizona because of the limitations in our labor force and our union relationships with management, and because of the cost structure in the United States. The chips that will be built in Arizona are going to be probably twice as expensive as those built in Taiwan. And from an economic point of view, there's no reason for TSMC to do that. They did it as part of a political strategy of support from the United States against the mainland. Well, Mr. Trump isn't playing that way. So I don't know where this goes, but I think he's not unusually, he's misinformed. He has his facts wrong, and his theory of what you can produce with coercion is going to backfire.